Unequal exchange is an important concept in world systems approach. Peripheral products, which have low labour costs, are exchanged with core-like products, which have high labour costs. The result is an unequal exchange that sends disproportionate surplus value to the core. As a result of wage differences between the core and peripheral workers, some measure of the surplus value extracted from workers in the periphery is transferred under the guise of international trade to capitalists in the core. Such exchanges have always been in favour of the core. Unequal exchange means that the periphery is always the loser when it comes to trade. Fair trade is about trying to stop this, but remains a joke because it avoids the real issue by developing fair trade with inconsequential goods only, when the real manner of the fraud I'm addressing concerns products crucial to the industrial might and arms of nations.
What is our ecological footprint? Today I'm going to use illustration to explain what it is and how we feed our planet. So let's get drawing. This is what we need to provide the resources we use and to absorb the waste we produce. 1.5 planets. So that means that it takes about a year and a half for our planet to regenerate what we use in a year. The Global Footprint Network calculates every year Earth Overshoot Day, and in 2013 it was on August 19th. So that was the day when we finished using our resources for the year. So think about it as a bank account. For the first 7 months and 20 days we lived on our annual revenue. After that we spent our capital. Seems like there is something wrong with that math. Our ecological footprint measures how much land and water area we need to produce the resources we use, things like energy, food, land for settlements, timber, seafood, and to absorb the waste we generate. Our biocapacity is the amount of biologically productive area that is available to provide the resources we use and to absorb the waste. So we can compare footprint and biocapacity to see if we are well balanced or not. So let's dig into that a little. I live in Canada, and our ecological footprint in 2007, that was published in 2010, was 7.01, meaning that to provide what we consume every year, we need 7.01 global hectares per person. But we live in a huge country, and our biocapacity was actually 14.92 global hectares per person. So if we do the math, the difference was 7.91, which means that technically we are an ecological creditor country. Does that mean that it's okay to consume as much as we do? Well, not really, because if the whole world lived like us, we would need more than 4 planets to produce the resources we use and to absorb the waste, because not every nation has so much land, such huge forests, and so many other natural resources. The United States has a footprint of 8 and a biocapacity of 3.87, so the difference is minus 4.13. So they are a big ecological debtor country. This is actually the case of most developed countries. Among the smaller footprints is the Democratic Republic of the Congo with 0.75. Although it's not an economically rich country at all, it has a biocapacity of 2.76. So you see that it's also an ecological creditor country with a difference of 2.01. The Global Footprint Network published the footprint in low, middle, and high-income countries between 1961 and 2008. This is the world's average biocapacity. What do you notice? Yeah, it is systematically decreasing. So basically the story reads, the wealthier people are, the bigger the footprint. So when we can afford it, it's hard to resist, I guess. And this is also confirmed by the fact that 17% of the world's population consumes 80% of the world's resources. So the main problem is not the absolute lack of resources, it's the fact that our global consumption is extremely uneven and inefficient. As usual, here are the key points to keep in mind. Humanity uses more resources than the Earth provides. The main problem is not the absolute lack of resources, it's the fact that our global consumption is unevenly distributed, that it favors only a few, and that it's also extremely inefficient. And the ecological footprint is a great tool to assess the pressure that we put on the planet. Basically, it helps us keep the big picture in mind and not get lost in the details.
Even though this story starts 1,000 years ago, the lessons from this story are as relevant today as they were back then. Because people are people, no matter what time we're from, and some of our habits don't change. Sometimes we hear people say, "Of course it would be nice to save the trees, but we have more important things to worry about right now." Like the economy. Sounds reasonable. We all know how important the economy is, because we know what it's like to not have enough money. We saw that during the financial crisis, when so many people were out of work and could barely afford to pay their bills. But what about an environmental crisis? What would it be like to not have enough trees, or enough clean water and natural resources? Would having a strong economy be enough to solve our problems, even if the environment were in crisis? It's a difficult question, and even the experts disagree. It's hard to know which is the correct answer, but with 7 billion people on the planet today, it's critical that we know the real answer so that we can make the right decisions in the way we value environmental concerns. The people living on a little place called Easter Island confronted this question also. So let's take a look at their story and see if there's something there to help us with our decision making regarding the environment. Our story starts about 1,000 years ago on a tiny dot in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 3,500 kilometers away from anywhere, called Easter Island. Although tiny, this island is famous because of the hundreds of giant stone heads found all over the island. The truth about how they got there and the people who lived there has been a mystery for centuries. Only recently, the truth of what really happened there has been uncovered. In the beginning, there were no people living there. The whole island was covered in dense rainforest, with many different species of trees and plants. But about 1,000 years ago, Polynesians stumbled across the island in their boats, and when they arrived, they found a beautiful paradise, rich in natural resources. So of course, they decided to stay. The island was an ideal place to live because it received lots of rain, and the island also had very fertile soil, so it was very easy to grow crops. With such great conditions, the Easter Island people soon raised families, built villages, and grew crops. Gradually, their populations started to grow. Archaeologists who first studied Easter Island could not believe that so few people living on such a tiny island could possibly have constructed the hundreds of enormous statues found all over the island. The Easter Island people carved and erected the statues themselves. Nobody quite knows who it was that first came up with the idea or why he decided to do it, but the idea became very popular. They carved the statues from the volcanic rock on the mountain. Then they had to move these hundreds of giant statues all over the island. Pretty difficult since they had no machines, but the Easter Islanders were clever. They moved the statues by cutting down the trees and using the logs to roll the statues across them. The logs would wear down as they moved the statues, so it took a lot of trees just to erect one statue. As the years went by, the Easter Islanders continued building statues. Their statue-building technology advanced, and soon they were building enormous statues that required hundreds of men and even more trees to move. As they built bigger and bigger statues, they became more and more prosperous, and soon people started to think that building more and bigger statues was the real cause of their prosperity. As the population of Easter Island grew, they needed to cut more and more trees to build more homes and clear land for farms, but building statues required more trees than ever. At Easter Island's peak, the population reached 20,000 people. By this time, it was clear that changes were happening to the island's environment. As the Easter Islanders built more statues, the forest started to disappear. Easter Island is small, so everyone could see what was happening. Perhaps they worried that they would run out of wood to build statues and homes, but the danger they faced was even greater than they realized. So now we understand what was really happening on Easter Island. But the people of the island couldn't see that. From their perspective, they only saw that the crops were not growing as well as before, and as a result, their economy was doing poorly. Since the Easter Islanders already considered statue building as the cornerstone of their economic prosperity, in a last-ditch attempt to revive the economy, they raced to build even more statues. Since there were only a few trees left to move the statues, they raced to cut down the last of the trees. And that's when they cut down the very last tree. Now, Easter Island is very small, and when you stand on the highest part of the island, you can actually see the entire island. So when they cut down the last tree, they knew it was the last tree. As there were no more trees left, the rains came less and less frequently, until the rivers dried up. The rains that did come gradually eroded the fertile soil, washing it into the sea to be lost forever. With steadily worsening soil and declining rainfall, the crop returns diminished to the point where Easter Island's economy collapsed altogether. In the end, on Easter Island, they were left with very little food to eat, very little water to drink, no wood to build fires to keep them warm in the winter, no wood to build houses, and worst of all, no wood to build boats, so no one could leave. Trapped in a place they could not escape, and with too few resources to go around, Easter Island civilization broke down in wars over what little remained. In an effort to salvage the last prosperity by taking it away from others, they even toppled each other's great statues until there was really nothing remaining of the great civilization that they had built. When the survivors were finally discovered by explorers in ships 300 years ago, the wars and starvation had killed so many of the Easter Islanders that only a few hundred remained from the peak of 20,000 people. The question that haunts us: from the top of Easter Island, you can see the whole thing, so they knew what was happening. Why didn't they act before it was too late? This question becomes especially important when we think about the many parallels between Easter Island and modern society. We share growing population and limited resources. Like the Easter Islanders, we have nowhere else to go. But today, we are also experiencing an environmental crisis. As on Easter Island, we are experiencing deforestation today, with half of the world's original forests already gone, and at current deforestation rates, 1/4 of the remaining forests gone in the next 50 years. As you'd expect, we are also experiencing soil erosion, with soil eroding on the world's farmland 10 to 40 times faster than it is created. Of course, there are also differences. Today we have advanced technology, but technology can cause problems just as well as it can solve them. If the Easter Islanders were able to devastate their environment with only a few stone tools and their own muscle power, how much worse could we do with the powerful technology that we have today? Because of advanced technology, we can catch every last fish in the sea. Today, fish stocks are depleted, with 70% of the world's fisheries fished at or beyond capacity. Our advanced technology also causes our enormous energy demands, which we supply by burning fossil fuels. This accelerates climate change with an expected increase of 2 to 6 degrees by the end of this century. Because of globalization, international trade, airlines, and the internet, all countries around the globe share resources and affect each other. Just as the fates of Easter Island's people were all connected, so are those of all the people on Earth. When the Easter Islanders ran into trouble, they had no other place to go, and likewise, if we allow the environmental problems on Earth to become insurmountable, we will also have no other place to go. Fortunately, we have good reasons to be optimistic about our ability to prevent and solve environmental problems. We can look to history to see why the societies that came before us failed or succeeded, and we can learn from their mistakes. By figuring out why the Easter Islanders failed to act before it was too late, we can find out how to ensure that we can prevent and solve environmental problems before it's too late for us.